All right, Sarah, take it away.
Today we will be talking about what JEP is, who we are, what our mission is, and how to get involved. Then also about some common misconceptions of the criminal justice system, and we will be discussing these misconceptions and some possible discussion questions as well.
About us, sorry, I was muted. Who we are. We're the Justice Education Project. We're a nationwide youth-led organization dedicated to educating others about the injustices within our criminal justice system. The Justice Education Project is the first youth-led, youth-focused national organization dedicated to spreading awareness about the systemic inequities within the criminal justice system. We currently do so through social media posts and articles, interviewing those who've been directly impacted by the justice system, and hosting events with similar like-minded organizations.
Our long-term goals are for criminal justice reform and activism to become a priority issue among Generation Z. We will continue having webinar Wednesdays moving forward, and we hope to see you there. For today's webinar Wednesday, we are going to be going over some common misconceptions involving the criminal justice system and debunking them. These are statistics or ideas that are commonly referred to but rarely broken down.
Thank you. So, for our first misconception, let's see. Okay, we have a question for everyone. If you could drop your answers in the chat, we'd appreciate it. What previously have you heard about the rehabilitation of prisoners versus the punishment of prisoners? I know personally from my own experiences, specifically in elementary school, I was taught, oh, well, if they're in jail, they deserve it. So why does it matter if they're rehabilitated and that they have options on the other side of it? But what we're going to have to explain is that rehabilitation is kind of the best form. The first common misconception about the criminal justice system is that prisoners need to be punished and not rehabilitated. The United States prison system is designed to punish criminals in hopes of preventing future offenses. However, in the US, more than 665 out of 100,000 people are arrested, with 68% of freed inmates being rearrested within 3 years. However, in Norway, only 63 out of every 100,000 people are arrested, and only 20% of those freed are rearrested within 2 years. So how did Norway achieve such promising statistics? Well, Norwegian correction officers attribute the country's shift from retribution to rehabilitation as the reason for such low incarceration rates. Before 2007, the Norwegian prison system had been similar to that of the US and focused on security and on punishment. However, after experiencing issues with drugs and violence within these facilities, Norwegian prisons shifted to more hospitable conditions for their inmates. With programs aimed at helping inmates find jobs after their release, promoting interactions between officers and between inmates, and housing prisoners in facilities with natural lighting and a view of the landscape, Norway has succeeded in restoring humanity to the incarcerated. This promising example of the Norwegian prison system suggests that rehabilitation is the best form of reducing crime and is overwhelming evidence that the US needs to reform its current model. So we have a question. Do the police always need a search warrant? Would someone mind answering this for me? Sarah, what are your thoughts?
Initially, and I feel like a lot of the public may think that the police always do, but
yeah,
actually,
right?
in reality, they do not always. And I think that that's something that isn't super broadcasted to the general public. And I think that's a really significant thing to know.
Yeah, I mean, I know that I personally always assumed that, oh, no, they always need a search warrant because it seems fair, but actually, police do not need a warrant to search. The second common misconception is that police always need a warrant to search. Although the Fourth Amendment protects citizens from unreasonable searches, there are situations in which the police can legally conduct a search without a warrant. These four main instances include, number one, consent. So if the police ask you to search your property and you agree, the search is deemed consensual and does not require a warrant. Number two, the plain view doctrine / preventing the imminent destruction of evidence. So if officers clearly can see contraband, they're able to seize it without a warrant. Police officers can seize illegal items in visible sight in order to prevent the destruction of evidence. And although a warrant is not required, police officers must have probable cause that the evidence is indeed illegal. The third cause is searches that accompany arrest. So if a person is placed under arrest, police officers are allowed to search the person and their immediate surroundings to protect themselves from possible weapons. Police can also do something like a protective sweep after an arrest to search for accomplices. And finally, the protection of personal or public safety. If police officers feel an imminent threat to their own safety or the safety of the public, then a warrant isn't required. For example, police officers are allowed to search a home without a warrant if there is probable cause that someone's being injured within the home or if someone's trying to flee the scene of the crime. All right, for our third misconception.
Yeah, the third misconception that we wanted to address is that longer sentences for criminals benefit the safety of the public. Firstly, it is important to recognize that over the past few decades, the crime rate has decreased. And this does parallel with mass incarceration, but not to the extent that many policymakers or the general public may perceive. For example, in America, crime rates have gone down, but they've only been decreasing since 1990. The dramatic increase in incarceration started in the 1960s to the 1970s, so therefore, mass incarceration is not the sole solution to creating a safer environment. In fact, researchers say that incarceration only explains 0 to 7% of the crime drop since the 1990s. Secondly, the increasing numbers of people in prison facilities are a direct result of harsher sentences, which again are counterproductive for public safety. Of 44 states with complete data between 2000 and 2014, all of them experienced an increase in time served by their prison populations. Violent offenses received the greatest increases. Between 1980 to 2016, there was a surge of 169,000 drug prosecutions in the United States. And also the length of a stay for federal prisoners doubled between 1988 and 2012 from an average of 17.9 months to an average of 37.5 months. Europe's prison system incarcerates 6 times less people than in America, but crime rates have been gradually decreasing as well. Their sentencing methods are much more rehabilitative oriented, therefore producing shorter and indeterminate sentences. More people in prison does not mean decreased crime rates. For example, in Tennessee in 1981, the prison population was 171 out of 100,000. In 2013, it increased to 338 per 100,000, but had the highest violent crime rate in the nation. It is important to note how for each successive year of incarceration, the risk to public safety declines. Crime involvement starts in the mid-20s and rises sharply, but for a short amount of time. So the age that people commit crimes declines starting from a person's mid-20s, therefore longer sentences don't line up with this trend. Also, prison is very expensive and can have negative consequences for public safety. Spending money on prison and prisoners means that money is taken away from policing, drug treatment, preschool programs, and other interventions that have crime-reducing benefits. 40 states surveyed spent $39 billion on maintaining their prisons in 2010, which is $5.4 billion more than their reported corrections budgets for that year.
Thank you, Sarah. For our fourth myth, we're going to go into 1350. I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but I definitely had before this. Oftentimes, the fact will be stated that African Americans commit 50% of crime while only being 13% of the population. Personally, I've seen this statistic used in arguments to stereotype African Americans in their relation to crime, but obviously statistics can't just be thrown out without context and without analysis. So in a 2019 FBI crime statistic, it showed that African Americans made up 50% of violent crime. And this is not because one race can be inherently more criminal, as there's no biological basis for that. The higher percentage of African Americans being arrested for crimes is because of over-policing in Black and brown communities. This over-policing drives from a history of discriminatory practices against Black Americans. As sociologist Danica Gordon said, Black neighborhoods are over-policed when it comes to surveillance and social control, and under-policed when it comes to emergency services. Racial profiling laws target people of color, like in New York, where they have the where they had the stop and frisk law, where officers were able to randomly flag down civilians to search them for contraband. Laws like the stop and frisk law led to predominantly Black and brown citizens being unnecessarily targeted by police officers. So when minority groups are specifically targeted by the police, it will lead to that group having a higher rate of arrests. And so, yeah, we are curious if you can answer the poll for us. Have you heard of the 1350 statistic before? And also, have you heard of any other racially charged statistics? I'm not allowed to vote on it. Okay. And then for our fifth myth.
Justin published the poll results.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I can't see it on my end.
Yeah, it seems like 71% of you guys have seen this statistic and other statistics being used before.
Yeah, and I just think it's super interesting to look at these statistics that are used to back so many, like especially for like political figures, their arguments when not really knowing the context behind it. And I just think that's significant. But yeah, the fifth.
And that's why we that's why we came up with misconceptions, because we wanted to address those statistics that are just thrown out willy-nilly without being addressed. Because you hear 1350 and you're like, that sounds very bad. But then you look into it and you're like, oh yeah, that does make sense. And we're not gonna, judge a group of people based off of one statistic, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And the fifth myth that I was interested in specifically was mental illness, and how it's kind of a taboo topic in terms of prisons and for prisoners. But after a lot of research, it is clear how much attention that this topic needs. In 44 states, a jail or prison holds more mentally ill individuals than the largest state psychiatric hospitals. And some important statistics are that 37% of people in state and federal prisons have been diagnosed with a mental illness, 44% of people in locally run jails. 1 out of 4 people experience a serious psychological distress in jails. 66% of people in federal prisons reported that they did not receive any mental health care while incarcerated. 27% of police shootings in 2015 involved a mental health crisis, and 27% of people who were incarcerated over 3 times within a year reported having a moderate or serious mental illness. The United States prison recidivism rates directly correlate with mental illness, but the majority of people incarcerated have a current or past mental health problem. The Bureau of Justice Statistics reported that 14% of prisoners in state and federal facilities met the criteria of a serious mental health condition, while only 5% of the general public meets this criteria. Also, the rate of mental health in prisons is increasing. The cost of incarcerating the mentally ill is really significant at $95,000 for each year for one prisoner with mental health issues versus $35,000 for those without. And this raising cost is due to increased sentence lengths, more expensive housing, and the cost of solitary confinement, which all contribute to people falling back into the criminal justice system.
Thank you, Sarah. I think that that's a really good point. So our question for you is, would more mental health interventions lessen the number of incarcerated individuals because mental health seems to be such an issue with the criminal justice system? And what kind of interventions could those be? I'm thinking specifically that instead of sending police when there's a mental health crisis, you can send someone who's trained in working with the mentally ill and working with those that are having breakdowns. But that's just one possible intervention that we could come up with. Sarah, do you have any other interventions that you're thinking of?
You definitely like shifting the police towards mental health outlets. That's the one that's coming to mind for me. But I have learned a lot about specifically like programs in some European countries where they teach the incarcerated individuals like methods for work. So then when they come out, they're put in a more stable living situations. And I think that's really interesting. And yeah, I think that's just one example.
Awesome. All right, great. Let's see. And then here are our sources for all of our misconceptions that we've had. And then finally, here were some discussion questions that we wanted to have. It's pretty difficult to have discussion questions when we don't have access to the chat right now. But I think that we should try to make it work because I think that it's important to get your guys' opinions on this. Have you heard of any of these statistics before today? Maybe we can create a poll for that.
Yeah, and while Irene is doing that, what in your life has affected your understanding of these statistics, and why do you think that these are misconceptions in the first place? And you could just like type them into the chat or private chat, any of us, and we can just read them out.
Yeah, sorry, the webinar layout's different than our usual Zoom calls. Yeah, we'd love to hear your feedback. Have your understandings of these criminal justice misconceptions changed at all?
And what other misconceptions do you have about the criminal justice system that we can kind of debunk and widespread on social media as well?
Yeah, because MisconJEPtions isn't just a one-time series. There are so many different misconceptions of the criminal justice system that we could talk about. So we would love some references. Yeah. Thank you guys so much for coming to our first MisconJEPtions meeting and this webinar Wednesday. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, and if you guys do have any questions at all, feel free to use the Q&A button on the bottom to ask any questions. And if we can move to the slide for the evaluation form, that'd also be great.